Welcome to a special presentation of A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. We are coming to you from the main hall at the Prophecy Summit 2012 at Branson. For those of you listening to the MP3 file on your iPods, we'll prove it now by some audience participation. Thank you very much. And this is a real treat for me, and this is one reason as a kid, when my normal friends were listening to Top 40 radio, I wanted to be a talk radio host when I grew up someday, because it gives me an opportunity to talk with guys who are a lot smarter than me and who are really, really interesting and talk about really cool stuff. And especially in this setting, because it's cool stuff of eternal consequence. To my left, a gentleman with an M.A. from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the author of Corrupting the Image, Angels, Aliens, and the Antichrist Revealed. Please welcome Douglas Hamp.
Thank you.
The creator of the forthcoming science fiction series Seed and author of the book Babylon Rising 2012 and The First Shall Be Last, Rob Skiba. I would have read more of his bio, but I'm sure this last line here is a lie because he doesn't have any gray hair. It says he's got a teenage son. That can't be right.
Grecian formula, like $6.95 at CBS.
I'm like our 12-year-old dachshund. I've got the gray on the muzzle on both sides. And to my right, the author of the Nephilim trilogy, and I must say, along with Chuck Missler's book, Alien Encounters, one of the reasons that I am sitting in this chair tonight. Also the books Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, The Cosmic Chess Match, and now the Watchers series on DVD, which you here in the audience have seen out on the table outside. Please welcome L.A. Marzulli.
Thanks, guys.
The topic tonight is one that has fascinates the world. You can't hardly turn the TV channel to a TV channel without seeing some program about aliens, UFOs, aliens and UFOs, aliens, UFOs in the Bible with ancient aliens and UFOs. Generally, though, the perspective is very secular. They're looking for some reason to explain the unexplained without bringing God into the equation. Let's go around the panel here. First of all, what was it that motivated you to even consider researching this topic, Doug?
I came to this very reluctantly. I did not want to actually get into the whole alien thing because I thought, they're kind of crazy. But as I was writing my book, I set out to write a book on the Nephilim. And I just kept coming back to where Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so the coming of the Son of Man would be. And then I realized, okay, I have to broach this topic. It's not something that I ever thought I would do. But as I saw that the evidence was taking me down there, I want to know the truth. Whatever the truth is, I want to know the truth. And if I'm going to write a book on it, then I have to actually go and to investigate that, even if it's outside of, my general comfort level. And, it's become very exciting because the Bible becomes alive again in a new way. It's not this stale document that we have, but we see that it's alive. It's predictive of so many things. And we see that with the Nephilim, as it was in those days, now it's here again. And that gets me a little bit excited because I see that we're pretty close to the Lord's second coming. And that is really why I got into it. I didn't expect that I really would.
Right.
I actually fell into it quite naturally. I got saved in 1977 when I was 7 years old, and the same year I saw Star Wars 13 times in the theater. Both radically impacted my young life. So I was glued to the stars and always had fantasies and aliens and all that stuff. I was always into that stuff. So I've always had that interest, but what got me started writing and really the catalyst that pushed me to do Seed in the first place and all the research for the books and stuff was a friend of mine graduated from Bible college, and he had seen the Ancient Aliens TV series. He had seen a number of episodes, and he called me up, and he was shaken in his faith would be too strong to say, but he was still pretty disturbed. And he said, Rob, what do we do with all this stuff? I mean, you can't deny the evidence. The evidence is there. I mean, the Nazca lines of Peru, we can go on and on and on. What do we do with this stuff? And I'm thinking, wow, here's a guy he was going to start his own Bible college. So here's a guy who just graduated Bible college, getting ready to start a Bible college, and he had no answers. for the Ancient Alien stuff. And he called me because he knew that I was into this stuff. And I, coming from a marketing background, find a need and fill it. Mm-hmm. That's really what got me into it. And the more I searched, the more I had to search. And that's where I'm still at today.
One of the first places I ever saw the word Nephilim was not in Genesis chapter 6. Unfortunately, it was at our local county library in St. Louis on the cover of L.A.'s book, and was intrigued enough to pick it up and dig into it. What led you down this path?
A friend of mine challenged me one day and said, what about life on other planets? My friend was an atheist, and I had no answer for him. I said, well, I don't know. I went down to a Christian bookstore, and I said, what about life on other planets? Got anything on that? And this person, the clerk, took me down an aisle, and there was a book by Dr. I.D.E. Thomas, The Omega Conspiracy. And when I read that book, literally it changed my life. And it set me on the path that I've been on ever since.
We're getting hand signals from Sam Miller here, our videographer, that you need to hold the microphone about here.
Sorry. I should know this by now, thank you. Please forgive me, Uncle Sam.
Uncle Sam.
Don't!
You see, this is why I never...
This is live radio, folks.
This is why my radio career never turned into a television career. That in the face for radio.
That book was a game changer, a life changer for me, simply because in the Omega Conspiracy, Dr. Thomas illuminated Genesis 6. And from there I went and looked at his sources, for instance, Pember and others, Josephus. And it began to weave a tapestry it took parts of the Bible which I had never understood before, and all of a sudden they became clear. And so I'm here today. By the way, Dr. Thomas is 92 years old. I received my honorary doctorate from Dr. Thomas, which just blew me away. And we felt it was almost like a rite of passage. When he put the mantle over me, it was like Elijah and Elisha in some ways. It was just a very memorable day. And he's, 92 in declining health and out of the game, as it were. But that set me on a quest that happened like in the early 90s. And so here we are now. Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
I would suspect that most of us here in the room have at least some grounding or some background in the connection between Genesis chapter 6, the Nephilim, and the UFO phenomenon. But let's look at that and examine the link. Doug, you mentioned Matthew 24:37, as it was in the days of Noah. What is it about that verse that necessarily means that we need to consider the Nephilim as part of end times prophecy?
Right. When Jesus said that, everybody listening would have immediately thought about the Nephilim. How do we know that? Well, we have what Peter said in 2 Peter 2:4. He talked about the angels that did not keep their first estate. They're now locked in this place called Tartarus. They did something that was so heinous that they got locked up in that place. And Jude says more or less the same thing, that these angels that didn't keep their proper habitation, they are also locked up, and they're being guarded there until the last day. So right there we have two New Testament writers commenting on the passage of Genesis chapter 6. And then if you go and you look at every ancient commentator, especially the Jewish ones, they unanimously talk about how in Genesis chapter 6 that it was fallen angels that came down and had relations with women. If you go and look at Philo here, Mr. Allegory himself, and he says it was the fallen angels that came and had relations. He says that the Nephilim were the procreation of two natures, that is, angels and women. He makes it very, very clear. Josephus says essentially the same thing. We see the Genesis Apocryphon. We see the Targumim, the Aramaic Targumim. If we look at the Septuagint, it tells us that the sons of God equal the angels. So everywhere we look, it's a unanimous voice that in that day, when Jesus said that, the Jews at that time understood Genesis chapter 6 to be talking about fallen angels coming down and creating a hybrid race. So why would we think the disciples would be any different? They're like, oh yeah, okay, the days of Noah, whoa, seriously? This is pretty scary, because that means that fallen angels are going to come down and they're going to create a hybrid race just like it was in the days of Noah. And I think what is such a disservice that we do to our children is we read these cute little stories about Noah's Ark, right? And you got the giraffe sticking his head out, and the elephant has his trunk over the side of the boat. And of course, why did God decide to do this? Well, because guys are hitting each other over the head with, pots and pans or something. And this is what our kids grow up on. They don't ever hear about these giants, these Nephilim, and the fallen angels. That's the real context of the story. So we have to look at that. And if that's what it was in those days, then it means that something very similar is going to happen when Jesus comes back.
Just to piggyback on that a little bit, everything Jesus did was very deliberate. He was very deliberate about everything he said and everything he did. And he said, I only do what I see the Father doing, and I only say what I hear the Father saying. So when we're looking at Matthew 24, in that particular passage where he says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man, take that in context of everything else that he had said prior to that, and I go even further back than that. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where the first prophecy in the Bible is God telling the devil that Eve's seed's going to crush his head. So getting your head crushed is kind of a bad thing. So I think the devil said, oh yeah? Well, I'm going to mess up the seed then. Flip the page to Genesis 6, and you've got what I call the Genesis 6 experiment. You've got angels mating with humans. Flash forward to the days Jesus is walking around, and his destination is Jerusalem, but he takes a massive detour and goes all the way to southern Lebanon, to Caesarea Philippi, to the very location where those angels landed in Genesis chapter 6, and he says, who do men say that I am? He asks the question. And everybody, some say Jeremiah, some say Elijah, some say one of the prophets, whatever. Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, this was a strategic location, a very strategic move. Remember, his destination is Jerusalem, so why did he go all the way up to southern Lebanon to ask this question that he already knew the answer to? Everybody had told him he was the Son of God from the day he was born. Angels announced it, right? He picks Nathanael to be his disciple, and he declares he's the Son of God. He's, why? Because I saw you under the fig tree. Demons said he was the Son of God. He told them to be quiet. So what's the big deal when Peter says it? I could never understand that till I stood in the physical location where that conversation took place. In Caesarea Philippi, at the base of Mount Hermon, in front of the altar of Pan and the gates of Hades, it was off to his left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, that's hugely significant, and that's, I think, Matthew 16, if I remember right. The same guys he's talking to, and they say, what's it going to be like in the last days? Well, they had already had a huge revelation, a few days earlier or whatever, at Mount Hermon, right? And now he's saying, oh yeah, here's a long list of things going to happen in the last days, and by the way, it's going to be like the days of Noah. So just like Doug said, I believe they were keenly aware of what was really being said there, but I don't think the church of today is, and that's the reason why I'm doing it. I know my fellow panel members are doing it as well, is to try to get people educated on what's really going on there, because if those days are going to be like the last days, and we think we're in the last days, I think we need to know what's going on.
Let me play devil's advocate, so to speak, for a moment. There's a parallel verse to the Matthew 24 verse, Luke 17:28, and it says, they were eating and drinking, marrying, being given in marriage, very similar to what you read in Matthew 24, until the day when Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot, they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building, but on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven, destroyed them all, so it will be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Jesus didn't specifically mention the Nephilim return. It doesn't mention that as the condition or the event that he was talking about. I mean, he didn't specifically say just as it was when the giants were roaming the land. Okay, he seems to indicate, and there are those who will interpret it this way, that what he meant was people just weren't paying attention. They were running about doing their thing, not paying attention to spiritual matters, and suddenly destruction comes down and kills them, or destroys them. So what then is it about Matthew 24, Luke 17, that convinces you that what Jesus really meant was something that he didn't specifically say, was talking about the presence of Nephilim in the land in those days?
Well, the question is, when in that passage, who is the they? Who is the they that are eating and drinking? And if we go to the passage in Genesis 6, it says, the sons of God saw the daughters of men. And that begs the question, who are the sons of God? And as a side note, if I were the fallen one, and I was going to take one item and do everything I possibly could to take this one item out of Scripture, to keep everyone dumbed down The one thing I would definitely go for is the whole Genesis 6 interpretation. That is the basis of spiritual warfare. It sets up the first question as far as in the days of Noah, so will be when the Son of Man returns. That's the one thing that the fallen one has succeeded, frankly, in my opinion. He's almost put the entire body of Christ to sleep with that, okay? Most people don't even know about Genesis 6. The pastors that are coming out of the seminaries think it's just a Sethite theory. You can't get from A to Z from there. I don't think we can understand anything about what is going on the planet at the present moment until we come to grips and a good grasp of the exegesis of Genesis 6. But here's the bottom line. Who is the they? When we read in Genesis 6, the they are not human beings. It says the sons of God saw the daughters of men. It's referring to the Benach Elohim, which are the fallen angels. They were eating and drinking and given in marriage. And that's why I believe this is what's coming. This is what's coming on the earth. In fact, in some ways, it's already here.
You know, it's very interesting because we read in Numbers 13, it says that it was a land that devoured its inhabitants. And we read in Enoch that the giants were actually eating not only animals, but people as well. And, of course, what do we see now today? We see men eating another man's face off. 4 times, not just once, but 4 times we've had this zombie cannibalism. Crazy stuff. I think we're pretty much in the days of Noah.
The manifestations that we see taking place today. Now, let's tie this to the UFO phenomenon, since we brought that up early on. What is it then about the UFO phenomenon that, in your view, links it to the return of, whether it's return of fallen angels, return of the Nephilim? Which do you see coming back, and why do you link that to the Genesis 6 paradigm? Whoever wants to tackle it, go ahead.
I guess I would go to Daniel 2:43, where it says that, as you saw iron mixed with clay, they will mingle themselves with the seed of men. And they are demons. They're fallen angels, essentially. And we learn that because the toes, the horns, and the kings are all one and the same. And in Revelation 17:12, the angel says to John, he says, the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom yet, but will receive authority for 1 hour with the beast. So there are 10 kings in John's day that were just waiting around to receive authority when the beast shows up. Well, that was 2,000 years ago. That means that these beings have to be at least 2,000 years old or more. So they cannot be human. These these fallen angels are those kings that were being referred to there. And so they, in Daniel 2:43, are fallen angel kings. We also see in Daniel chapter 10 that the prince of Persia and the kings of Persia withstood the angel that came to speak to Daniel. So what we see there is that principalities and powers are going to mingle themselves with the seed of men. It's a reflexive verb. That means that the subject is doing the action and receiving the action. Just like you say, I bathe myself, or something like that, where you both do it and you receive it. They're going to mingle themselves with the seed of men. And that is precisely what we see happening with the whole alien abduction thing. It's not simply about taking people and abducting them. It's actually David Jacobs who says it's not just an abduction program. It's a breeding program. It's a breeding program. They're making a hybrid race. In fact, in Daniel chapter 8, it says, because of transgression, an army was given over to the little horn. And I think that Satan is actually making an army because he's trying to even out the odds. He's outnumbered 2-1. He needs to create some more people in his army to do the work.
Rob, in the research that you did to set up the premise for the series Seed, what was it that you found most surprising? I mean, did you look into the UFO phenomenon, the accounts of abductees and contactees? I
did a little bit. I wasn't really tracking in that direction so much. My research and everything was dealing with the fallen angels of, like, Azazel in particular, and looking into all of that. It will eventually get into the UFO side of things because they are connected, but that wasn't the direction I was going initially. But just to add to what Doug just said, there's a line in the movie Tron. How many of you saw the latest movie Tron? A few of you? there's a scene in the movie where Clue has got. Did you see it?
I have not.
Clue is like the clone of the main character. He has this army, and the main character says Clue can't create anything new. He can only repurpose old models. And he's creating this army, and it was such an allegory as I'm watching that, to echo what Doug just said, that, yeah, I believe that's what's going on here. It's the creation of an army.
Now, L.A., I know you've done extensive research and conducted interviews with contactees, abductees, and what did you find, what evidence have you seen for this sort of genetic hybrid program that leads you to conclude that it is of a fallen angelic origin?
I'm actually going to talk about this tomorrow in my talk in this room. I think it goes on at 10:45 or something. But I'll give you whet your appetite. We know that people have been abducted, and in that abduction process, implants are put into them. I won't go into all the details of those implants. I'll talk about that more tomorrow. But what got me, which absolutely blew me out of the water, is when I asked Dr. Roger Lear, who's taken 17 of these out of people. So we have hard physical evidence. It takes it out of the realm of theory, and we have hard physical evidence. These people who claim to be abducted. Get this. With Dr. Roger Lear, one implant case, when he put his finger up to the implant, just moved like this, the implant traveled under the skin and you could see it. Welcome to high strangeness. When Dr. Lear went in to cut the implant, all right, he found a membrane over this tiny little metal chip that you couldn't cut with a scalpel. Welcome to high strangeness. When Dr. Lear removed the implant, sometimes they come out in 3 or 4 pieces. He put it in a petri dish filled with the person's plasma, the blood. Spun in a centrifuge and put in the plasma. Shook the thing up and watched them aggregate and reform. Memory metal. When I asked Dr. Lear, what are these things doing? He says they're changing the host's DNA. They're changing the host's DNA. Talk about this tomorrow because it's absolutely, the implications of it are staggering and extremely sobering. So, it takes it out of the realm of theory, of hearsay, because we've got physical evidence. And when you put these things under an electron standing microscope, it is carbon nanotubes, double-walled carbon nanotubes. We know that they're operating at a frequency of 317 gigahertz. Our fastest computer on the planet runs about 3.5 gigahertz. This thing is a super machine inserted in the human body. We believe it's manipulating a DNA. Hardcore evidence.
So what then draws the connection between this piece of hardware and a spiritual, interdimensional being, if you will, as opposed to an extraterrestrial being?
Because it actually ties into ancient biblical prophecy, specifically talking about the mark of the beast. And I don't want to give you that information now, because that's the punchline tomorrow at 10:45. and for me to build that, I'm going to build a real strong case, and then sock you with what I think is going to happen, which is absolutely astounding. I'll whet your appetite. I said it's changing your DNA. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing at all.
If you're watching this on the DVD at home, at least finish out this program before you pull out and put in the other disc with his talk on it. If you're listening to the MP3, the DVDs are available through Prophecy in the News. I remember that much from my radio training. But beyond the prophecy, though, I mean, there are still those skeptics out there who will still argue that this is evidence of extraterrestrial technology as opposed to interdimensional. That this is not the work of a fallen angel, that somehow Zeta Reticulans have come to Earth and are trying to do something to us. Or it's the return of the Anunnaki. Zechariah Sitchin, rest his soul, carried this belief. Yeah, okay, carried this belief till the day he died. So again, where do we as Christians, where do we find the evidence to say, you got it wrong, we've got the answer?
Let me. Here's something to think about. We are all human beings in this room. At least I hope so. Okay? There may be an alien in it. I'm just joking. So we all have the same senses. We all have the same attributes. Okay? We have a computer-like brain. So we all pretty much equal in that way. We see, we taste, we smell, we hear, we think, we have memories. Those are our attributes. Those are in all of us. Angels, whether fallen or good, have attributes that are indigenous to them. what we see, and I'll give you the punchline first. When Peter sits there in his jail cell and an angel appears, the angel appears and walks through the wall, doesn't he? He just appears in the cell. Peter's not sure whether he's awake or asleep. His brain is fogged. He's chained to a wall. He looks over and his cellmates have all been switched off. They're suddenly asleep. Then, before the angel doesn't touch Peter, all of a sudden the chains fall off of Peter. And the angel says, let's go. The door opens, the jail cell opens. He walks into the corridor. All the guards have been switched off. They're asleep. And get this, in the Roman culture, if you were a guard and you were found sleeping at your post, that's immediate execution. So guards did not fall asleep. They're being switched off like this. They get out in the courtyard. We all know the story. Peter, the angel opens these huge prison gates, again, manipulating matter and energy in ways that we don't comprehend. Got that? That's a good angel. Now let's look at the abduction phenomena. You're laying in bed. You look over. There's 4 gray aliens, right? All of a sudden, you can't move. You're paralyzed. You look over at your mate. They've been switched off. You're levitated off the bed. You're floated through the wall. That can't happen. Or you're floated through a picture window. That can't happen. You're floating. You know you are. You're then taken. It's the same. In other words, I believe that this is a good, strong correlation between what the fallen ones are doing and what the good ones are doing. The same attributes. One uses it for good things. The other fallen angels are using it for bad. When they can manipulate space and time, they can switch off people. They can manipulate matter by moving people through walls. It defies our physics, and we see there's a correlation between what happens in the abduction phenomena and what happened thousands of years ago with Peter in the jail cell.
I see an open Bible here, and that generally means there's a pretty good chance that the guy holding it has a verse he wants to reference.
Oh, well, not with regard to what L.A. just shared, but I was just thinking, in Ezekiel, we've got some interesting creatures described there, and it sounds like a UFO and all this stuff. People like Zachariah Sitchin and stuff, and Eric Von Daniken would point to this stuff and say, see, ancient alien,
Right.
But we take this to be creatures coming from heaven, and yet these particular angels are very curious. They have the form of a man, but yet they have calf feet. So, right off the bat, that sounds like a satyr to me. Human body, calf feet. It's got wings, got hands on the wings. It's got a head, but it's got 4 faces. Right? Lion, ox, eagle, man. What's missing? Fish, lizards, insects. Mm-hmm. Is it just a coincidence that the fallen ones seem to always manifest as insectoids and reptilians and Dagon fish gods? Could it be that Lucifer was maybe one of this variety, but represented that part of the animal kingdom? In other words, you have watchers and things like that appear to be assigned to humans, and these particular watchers in Enoch lusted after their humans and went with them. Maybe these angels are in charge of kingdoms, the animal kingdom, the bird kingdom, things like that. And could it be that Lucifer was in charge of the insect, lizard, and fish kingdom, and he's curiously missing from any description in heaven, but yet manifests continually in so-called alien encounters?
Mike Heiser's got an interesting analysis of that. If you're not familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Heiser, highly recommended. drmsh.com, in which he does a thorough exegesis, in my view, and I'm not a scholar, but it seems to me that his explanation of the word nakash has a very possible explanation for that. Nakash, in other places in the Old Testament, seems to refer to beings of serpentine appearance, so that what you're dealing with is a perhaps bipedal serpentine creature being of glowing countenance, because the word also has some, can also mean shining one, not a talking snake. It would seem a little more logical if Eve had encountered a talking snake in the garden, she would have, instead of just carrying on a conversation with it like she saw those things every day, which was very possibly the case. So that you may be onto something there. Doug, what is the end game? What is the purpose here? What are they trying to do? Why? Did Rob have it right? Is it just trying to disrupt the seed? The Messiah has already come. He's coming back. Why mess with the seed now?
Well, if he can destroy, ultimately if he can destroy the Jews, then he has a stalemate with God. That's one way to do it. If he can destroy all humanity, that's another stalemate. So he has a couple of options. But if he can at least destroy the Jews, then God cannot fulfill his promise because God made a blood oath in Genesis chapter 15. And he promised that he would give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants, he would give the land. He would make them the head and not the tail, and all these other promises. And so God has to make good on that, because God said, by my life, I swear I'm going to do these. And so if Satan can just make him a liar in just one of the promises, then he has a legal stalemate. You see? So that's one way he can do that. And you know what's interesting is when the Lord Jesus comes back, we don't find the world fighting against one another. We find them all sort of huddled together, if you will, waiting for his return to fight him. That's what we see in Revelation chapter 19. That Satan, the false prophet, and all the kings of the earth are gathered together to make war against the one who is on the horse and those who come with him. So it's not like, Armageddon is one nation against another. No. They've all come together and they're expecting him. I actually think it's going to be something like this. That we're going to have sort of a good alien, bad alien kind of thing. And the so-called good aliens will be those that will get there first. And they'll say, you know what, people of the world, you should be glad that we got here first. Because there's a hostile alien force that's hot on our tracks. They're going to be here in about 7 years. And if we get busy and get to work and start making you guys into Nephilim, then we can overcome them. And so you need to be changed, because when they come, they're going to try to take away your way of life. They're going to try to stop you from having all that fun. And we can overcome them together. So I think he has a number of different scenarios that he thinks could play out. But he has to stop, because he knows that Jesus is coming back. Because you see, Satan is he's like the squatter in the house. He basically got foreclosed on 2,000 years ago. And the Lord said, okay, I'm taking the title deed back. And he says, fine, but I'm not leaving. So he has basically, 2 days, and on the third day, the marshal comes back. So the marshal Jesus is coming back, and he's just going to try to stay in the house no matter what. He says, over my dead body, and the Lord says, fine, we can do that. So that's what he has to do.
So yeah, please.
Let me just add something. There's a book that my colleague Russ Disdar recommended. It's called The Supernatural by Graham Hancock. This guy's obviously not a Christian, and he took the drug ayahuasca, a very powerful hallucinogenic drug. He took it over 40 times. And all through the book, he's making a case with ancient shamanic cultures, how they go into an altered state. Guess who they see when they're there? They see the grays. They see the grays. And they're blown away by this. And they also realize, the reports come back, that in fact, Graham Hancock makes a very cogent point, that whatever these guys are, these little grays, they are very interested in some sort of a breeding program. They're very interested in reproducing with us on some level. So here we have from ancient shamanic cultures to a guy who's taking, and remember, this is pharmakia, this is taking a hallucinogen which moves you into the second heaven. Guess who resides there? The fallen one and his minions. And that's what they're tapping into. And isn't it just amazing that what they run into are the grays? I found that just extraordinary. And also reptilians. Both. Mm-hmm. They see the grays and then the taller reptilians. They're all there. I found that it's an amazing link.
I read a very similar book to that about someone who was basically shamanism 101, how to become a shaman.
Yeah.
And you got to take this very powerful drug, and this person went down to South America and did that. And when he was this practically comatose state, these very similar kinds of what he described is he saw these stars falling from heaven, and then they sort of manifested in a sense, and they came and told him that we are actually the real rulers of the world. And they said that we came down to earth to escape from our enemy. Okay, and so then he comes out of this trance. He goes tells the local missionary, and he says, "Oh yeah, that's true." And he shows him Revelation chapter 12. He's like, "Wow, this is incredible," because basically they admitted who they were. And as you were playing the devil's advocate, I just want to go back to that. if we go to people like Dr. John Mack from Harvard and Dr. David Jacobs, the conclusion that they have come to is not that these are very much, that they're not really physical type beings, but these are better described as interdimensional kind of beings, and that they are trying to breed with us so that they can take on some type of physicality. So, and now Dr. Jacobs is just scared stiff because he realizes that they're stronger technologically than we are, they're stronger psychologically than we are, and that at best we're going to be second-class citizens in their world.
I had a really interesting interview maybe 18 months ago with a gentleman named Rick Strassman, who did a number of experiences in a university setting with DMT and wrote a book about it called The Spirit Molecule. And he reported that those who took DMT, which is magic mushroom, basically, had similar experiences where the subjects in these tests were seeing basically insectoid-type creatures. But what was really bizarre was that there were at least a couple of instances where people who were on separate trips at the same time reported seeing the same thing at the same. In other words, they were seeing something that the people who weren't high couldn't see, and reporting the same exact thing happening at the same exact time. In other words, they were looking at something going on in another dimension. And his theory is that somehow this is how the ancient Hebrew prophets were able to see what they should see. Now, he completely went off the rails there and said, we need to do more of this kind of testing. Yeah, face plant, or this is why I have a flat forehead, by the way. I do this a lot. And it's startling, like I said, that he didn't kind of see the danger in that. But sadly, that is the way our culture appears to view interaction with the supernatural realm. As we approach our break for the evening, I just want to toss it to you three fellows. What do you see going on in the culture that is preparing those around us to willingly accept our alien overlords with open arms? Go ahead.
Well, it starts off with Darwin. In order to create a new paradigm, you have to do away with the old paradigm. Darwinism has done away with the old paradigm, which was a Christian worldview. Darwinism is taught in all schools, in academia. If you want to be a biologist or whatever, a scientist, you embrace Darwinism, where you just keep your creation theory tucked well out of the way. So Darwinism sets up an intellectual and a spiritual vacuum in the entire human race. And I'll talk about this in my books and lectures and everything else, when Ben Stein sits down with Richard Dawkins and poses a very simple question: where did life come from? Dawkins' answer is he's promulgating the alien gospel, which is somehow in a distant universe or a distant galaxy far, far away, there was a group of aliens who existed millions of years who somehow reached a very high level of civilization and technology and created us and then scattered us through the universe. That's called panspermia. All right, what he's promulgating, what Dawkins is holding on to, is the idea of the so-called alien gospel, where the aliens, so-called ET, created all life on this planet, genetically manipulated early man, started the world's civilizations, and now at this critical juncture in human history, they are coming back. That sets everything up for the coming great deception. Darwinism is sort of a linchpin, which changes the paradigm, changes the worldview, creates a vacuum, so guess who can show up? This thing has been in the works for thousands of years. Just think of these things. Satan comes with Scripture. Satan comes with all signs and lying wonders. That's not, hey, Rock, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat. That's a whole different deal. Men faint from fear from what is coming on the earth. Unless, the elect, unless there's a short, no flesh would survive. The elect would be deceived if that were possible. Why do we get all those warnings from Jesus and the apostles and Paul? Why do we get those warnings? They're very stern, they're very extremely sobering, and they tell us that something is coming which is absolutely unprecedented. The secret of lawlessness, the mystery of lawlessness, has been working for literally thousands of years. And we're at the point, I believe, where it's like the tip of the spear. It's ready to go. It's ready to happen. Everything's in place. We are now linked up by telecommunications, where we see everything at the speed of light. Movies, television shows, books, everything talks about this transhumanism, these chimeras. Like I showed, the Katy Perry video. I'll show it again tomorrow. Because it blows people's minds. Oh my gosh, this isn't, she loves me. Yeah. It's a whole different deal. So briefly, that's where we're headed. And it's coming. It's really, I believe it's soon. It's imminent.
Yeah, I agree with everything LA just said, and it is in your face in the media, in every form of media these days. I talked about Ancient Aliens before. They've got 4 seasons worth of we've been seeded by Ancient Aliens. But, of course, in the movies, too, the same thing is happening. In Prometheus, just came out. Some of the oldest written texts that we have on the planet are the Sumerian texts. And in the Sumerian texts, it basically says the gods got together and they cast lots, and one of them, it fell on one of them to sacrifice himself to create a new race of people. And that's what you see. The opening sequence, and spoiler alert for anybody who wanted to see it, is this spaceship comes to early Earth, drops a guy off, he takes some potion, and he begins to disintegrate, falls into the water, and his DNA begins to do stuff in the water, and it starts the process of Darwinian evolution. And the implication is Ancient Aliens are our parents. And we're seeing it in the movies constantly. And the fact that people like Dawkins is out there, evolution has become completely bankrupt to the point where they're like, yeah, we know, well, what's the alternative? Oh, panspermia. Aliens came here and seeded us.
Yeah.
And here you got Dawkins, right? He's the mouthpiece. He's like the replacement for Carl Sagan these days. And the guy he's brilliant, but yet bankrupt at the same time. I mean, I listen to the guy, I'm like, how can you be that smart and that stupid at the same time? Because all you gotta do is back that question off far enough, and sooner or later you gotta say, who created the aliens?
Yeah. It's like the old joke about how does the Earth is suspended in space? Well, it's on the back of a turtle. Well, what's underneath the turtle? Another turtle. Well, what's below? It's turtles all the way down.
Exactly.
Doug, what's the influence of the culture, especially on our kids? How are we being fed or prepared for this coming deception?
Right. Well, it did start with Darwin, obviously. That has set the stage very strongly. It almost seems like Satan knew that it would come to a point where they would have to say, well, somebody had to get the DNA started. Because it comes back to the seed, ultimately. Because, maybe we can imagine that some rock was floating in space and it hit another rock and here's Earth or something. But where did life come from? You see, that's the really tricky question. And when we talk about seeds or DNA, we're talking about information. And any good information scientist will tell you that information doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of man-hours to create programs. And it takes intelligence. It's hard work. And so information has to come from an intelligent mind. And this is why Francis Crick, who was the co-discoverer of DNA, he was one of the early proponents of the directed panspermia theory, because he realized that this stuff is so complex. I mean, our one strand of DNA is more complex than your operating system on your computer. This is very, very complex stuff. And it's not only linear, but it's also three-dimensional. And then it's even encrypted. This is incredible stuff that we have, and we don't even understand the whole of it. So DNA is so incredible. It's got so much information packed in there. Where does it come from? It's just going to randomly happen? I mean, the odds of that. There's not even enough molecules in the universe, not enough atoms or electrons in the universe that as far as the probability goes. You'd sooner count all the grains of sand on the entire Earth 1 billion times over than for this life to just spontaneously happen. So you have to go to this directed panspermia theory, and that just leads you back to the aliens are your daddy. And if they're your daddy, then maybe they're our brothers too, and we can hang out with them, and we can make love with them, and have lots of fun. So that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, and that leads you to the Katy Perry video, right? Yeah. That's right. Douglas Hamp, Rob Skiba, L.A. Marzulli joining us on the panel tonight. This is a special version of View from the Bunker. We're going to take a break here in just a moment. 5 minutes for you in the audience. If you're watching this at home or listening to this in your car on your MP3 player, the break will be considerably shorter. Coming up in the next hour as L.A. Marzulli leaves us, and L.A., thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you having us here, or being with us here. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to answer, or at least attempt to answer the question, if the Nephilim were wiped out during the flood, Where did the ones come from that appeared after the flood? That and more as we continue with the view from the bunker. If you want to stay, this is the broadcasting trick, teasing ahead. Live from the Prophecy Summit in Branson, I'm Derek Gilbert on A View from the Bunker. More straight ahead.
Is not prepared for what is coming. A secret hidden in plain sight since the founding of America. A secret so consequential that its unveiling will crack the very walls that hold the nations together. A powerful clandestine group holds the key to the cipher. They alone have been the keepers of the secret destiny of America until now. From the best-selling author of The Ahriman Gate and Nephilim Stargates.
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
Comes a new, shocking, non-fiction book the U.S. government does not want you to read.
It is the story of a new world that became a friend and liberator of the old.
Something wicked this way comes.
About December 21st, 2012. That's the date that many doomsday prophets are claiming the world as we know it will end.
There's a mystery surrounding the year 2012.
In case you haven't heard, the world is going to end in 2012.
The occult desire of the ages is here.
There is a global meltdown coming that they want one world order, a new world order, at the end of this event.
The new world had been called into existence.
But the burdens of global citizenship continue to bind us together. Partnership and cooperation among nations is not a choice.
British Prime Minister Brown today declared a new world order is emerging.
We needed a new world order.
A new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
A new world order.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
And once you know the secret, you'll know what you have to do to survive. Apollyon Rising 2012.
The world is in the grip of a psychotic mass murderer. He is responsible for the deaths of untold millions of men, women, and children. His power is exercised through a network of secret societies, and it reaches into the very highest levels of governments all over the world. Examine the evidence. Draw your own conclusions. Peer into darkness with Derek Gilbert and Sharon Gilbert on PID Radio. www.pidradio.com.
These guys are going to be released in the future again. The return of the Nephilim, the fallen angels, the gods themselves with a small g. They are coming back during the apocalypse time.
Cracking hits to rip like the beaks of a griffin with sharp pointy tips and the grip of a falcon. Grasping with grappling talents and worn on medallions of battling Sith thinking no man. So many masterpieces.
Doing our best to drive the internet to think. This is A View from the Bunker from the Prophecy Summit 2012 at Branson. I'm Derek Gilbert. We appreciate you in the room here who have stayed up late with us tonight. We've, at this point in the evening, crossed past or getting close to 11:30 local time, and this is at the end of a long day full of mind-expanding, mind-blowing presentations. Chuck Missler's holographic universe, my head exploded about 4 times. So we appreciate you hanging out with us tonight, and we'll keep going as long as we can be coherent. For those of you listening to the MP3 file, by the way, I have to plug the folks who provided the bumper music that I've inserted. You folks in the room, sorry you didn't hear it. It's Destiny Lab, the name of the group. The new disc is called The Original Sin, which is, in their view, apparently evolution, or the teaching thereof. L.A. Marzulli has departed, but we still got Doug Hamp and Rob Skiba with us here on the stage. I can tell it starts to get late when I start losing nouns. And as promised, we want to get into some discussion here. These are questions I know that have come up before, and they're probably in some sense like the question that Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis will talk about. You know, what are the most common questions he gets? And he lists off about 12 of them, and 6 of them are, who is Cain's wife? You know, this is probably one of those types of questions. If the Nephilim were killed in a global flood, and the Bible tells us the flood was, the whole world was inundated, presumably the giants that were in the land in those days died. Numbers 13:33 tells us that the spies who came back from the land of Canaan with Caleb, assuming that they weren't lying to try to get out of the invasion, saw Nephilim in the land. But we do know at the very least that there were giants at least through the time of David, about 1000 BC. And these giants are even recorded in other cultures. There's some evidence left behind in tablets found in Egypt that made reference to Rephaim. So, where did they come from? Rob Skiba.
Hey. Okay. You mentioned Numbers 13:33, so if we're going to talk about post-flood Nephilim, that's one of the first ones that people point to. However, I would say there are plenty of references to giants that you have to dig to find, but they are there long before Numbers 13:33, because that's 800 plus years after the flood. 450 years after the flood, you have what I call the Genesis 14 war. It's the war of the 9 kings, 4 kings against the 5 kings. And Josephus comes right out and tells you that this was a war against the offspring of giants. And if you go into the Hebrew, looking at the names of the people there, you'll see that they are giants. In fact, I am fully convinced that the greatest archaeological find of all time is waiting for us underneath the Dead Sea. Because it says that the 5 kings retreated and fell into the tar pits, which is what the Dead Sea was before it became the Dead Sea. It was a tar pit. So essentially, you have 5 armies worth of giants, probably very well preserved with all that salt, under the Dead Sea, in my opinion. And Dr. Judd Burton and I have had some interesting conversations about that because he's an archaeologist.
He's an interesting guy. Yeah.
Yes, he is. And we very much would love to do a dig or do a survey or something to see what's under there someday. I'd love to be a part of that. So if we've got a war of giants, and this is Lord of the Rings we're talking about here. I mean, this is epic.
They've got a cave troll.
Yeah, that's right. This is epic. And this is a battle of the offspring of giants at a time, this is 450 years after the flood, at a time where some people are still living to be almost 500 years of age. So when you start looking at characters like the ones that they saw in Numbers 13:33, these are the sons of Anak. Okay, so these are further generations down, even from the Genesis 14 war. So they're sons of Anak. Anak was a son of Arba. Arba was an Amorite. The Amorites come from Amorius, who was a son of Canaan, who was a son of Ham, who stepped off the ark. So, in my view, and I started from the position that most of my peers come from, the same position that there was another incursion after the flood. And that's based on Genesis 6:4, where it says there were giants or Nephilim on the earth in those days and also after that. They'll use that phrase after that and apply it to Numbers 13:33 and other post-flood accounts. And I say, well, okay, but you need 2 to 3 witnesses to establish truth, and that is in multiple places in the Scripture. So I started to look for other witnesses for that assumption that there's another incursion after the flood. And the problem was I couldn't find any witness, neither in the canonized text nor in the what I call synchronized, biblically endorsed extra-biblical texts of Enoch, Joshua, or Jubilees, which all tell the same story. So I'm not saying it didn't happen, I'm saying I can't find any evidence that it did. But I can look at Genesis chapter 10 and you get a whole bunch of names given there. And maybe we can talk about this after as a rebuttal, maybe. But I'll save that card. But what's in a name, right? Well, the names mean things. And there's all kinds of interesting things in the Hebrew of the names given in Genesis 10, specifically the ones that come from Ham's line. But I find it awfully coincidental that you get all these names given in Genesis chapter 10, and then when you see later on in the Scriptures, specifically in the Torah, the first 5 books, where God says, go into this village and kill everything. Kill the women, kill the children, wipe out everything. They're the same names. So, and there's no angels anywhere in the picture. So that led me to believe that it's more of a genetic carryover issue than it is a repeat incursion issue.
So somebody on the ark.
That would be, and I base that also on Genesis 18 in chronological order. I believe Genesis is written in chronological order. It's a linear book. It talks from about creation all the way to the Exodus and linear storytelling. The whole Torah is written in a linear fashion. There's nothing even in the writing style of Moses that would in any way indicate that Genesis 6:4 is the only verse that's nonlinear in the entire Torah. So just realizing everything's linear and looking at Genesis 6:4, and we'll talk about this, I suppose, after what the after that is in Genesis 6:4, because I believe it is entirely in a pre-flood context, and the synchronized biblically endorsed extra biblical text back that up 100%.
Doug, your views.
Okay. Well, it's funny that we keep getting this question because I think Rob and I agree on pretty much everything else. This is the one place where we have a divergence of opinion.
We need to trade chairs here to separate you two?
Well, we agree to be kind to each other. And, but this is good. This just causes us to dig further, right? This is how iron sharpens iron. So when I read Genesis 6:4, what I see there in the Hebrew is that, of course, there were giants on the earth in those days, or Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also after that. But then comes the key phrase, which is the word in Hebrew, which could be translated when, or that, or it's referring to both things. In other words, that the sons of God came down. So that refers back to the days of Noah and also after that. So what I see there is I don't see any conflict that you have the giants or the sons of God coming down in the days of Noah, and they came down also after that. I don't see any challenge there in the grammar that would say that they only came down in those days, but then the ones after that were that they had to have come, that they were just genetically related, but that the sons of God came down both times. So, in fact, if we read a good translation that I like is called the International Standard Version. I think they put this in a pretty good rendering here. The Nephilim were on the earth at that time, and also immediately afterward, when those divine beings were having sexual relations with those human beings, human women who gave birth to children for them. So, as they have rendered it here, the Nephilim were on the earth at that time, and also after, when the sons of God, or the divine beings, were having sexual relations. So, it can be used for both places, that it's not only were the sons of God coming down in the days of Noah, but they were also coming down afterward. And hence you have children at both times. But the sons of God were coming down in Noah's day, and they were also coming down afterward.
Well, please.
Can you read that again?
The Nephilim were on the earth at that time, and also immediately afterwards. Yes.
Immediately after. That's not 800 years after when they saw the spies in the land of Canaan. The Hebrew word that's used there is the next sequential order of events, and it even translated there as immediately after. It's in a pre-flood context. Because the book of Enoch, chapter 10, verse 10, says that the first generation Nephilim were to kill each other off within 500 years. Done. Civil war, I believe this is the clash of the Titans that the Greeks stylized the biblical account into their fantasy mythology. It's the clash of the Titans, essentially. So the first generation Nephilim are dead after 500 years. You still got 700 years to the flood. So how did they corrupt all flesh in Genesis chapter 6, verse 12, after that event right there of the first generation Nephilim being killed off? Because they're all dead. In Enoch 10:10. In Enoch 10:12, the parents of those Nephilim are judged, buried, and bound in Tartarus, which is the judgment imposed upon anybody who breaks that command, angels mating with humans. That's the judgment that God imposes on them.
That's pretty clear in the Epistle of Jude. That was the reason they were in prison. Yeah, and 2 Peter.
Yeah, and so we have no to answer that there's no confirming scripture that says that there is an after that incursion. Even in the Hebrew right there, it says immediately after. And if you look at the word, I think it's Asher, if I remember right, that's translated as when. People say when, whenever, but they conveniently ignore the fact that it could be also translated as because. In fact, it's translated more often in the scriptures as the word because than it is when. And as the word because, it all of a sudden translates to being a first cause issue with perpetuating consequences versus a repeat offense issue. If you use when or whenever, it sounds like anytime an angel comes down, you get Nephilim. Or if you say because they did this, you end up with Nephilim, well, then it's a first cause issue with lasting effects. The other thing is, it says these same Nephilim became the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And the word old there is olam in Hebrew, which means ancient. It's translated like 114 times in the Bible as forever and 136 times as eternal, or vice versa, I forget which, but you get the point. That word, it says these same guys we're talking about in Genesis 6 are the ones from ancient so far back in time it's almost forever ago, not last week when we saw them in Canaan. So, looking at the Hebrew breakdown of the words right there, again, everything appears, including the after that, to be in a pre-flood context. First of all, it says immediately after the judgment of the first watchers and the death of the Nephilim. But when we look in the synchronized, biblically endorsed, extra-biblical text, we see in Jubilees 7:24 the same exact phrase used. It says, and after this. It's the same as the after that of Genesis 6:4. Prior to verse 24 in Jubilees, we just learned the same thing that Enoch talks about, that the watchers were judged and the first generation Nephilim are gone. After that, it says that they sinned against the beasts and the birds and everything that moved on the earth, and they began to create animal and human hybrids, which is reflected also, another witness, in Joshua 4:18. So I believe that the return of the Nephilim after that, in the pre-flood context, came as a result of the creation of animal-human hybrids. And that's of a particular interest to me because of Matthew 24:37. As it was in the days of Noah, the days of Jared were angels mating with humans. The days of Noah, 700 years, there's 600 years from Noah's life before the flood, is the creation of animal-human hybrids. And I turn on the evening news, and what do we see? I don't see any news reports about angels mating with humans, but I see lots of news reports of people mixing species exactly as it was in the days of Noah.
So we move forward. We get into the days of the Hebrews taking the land of Canaan. Joshua and his wars, and Mike Heiser makes a pretty good case that the wars of Joshua were wars against the giants and the hill tribes in the hill country of Canaan. If these were then just genetic descendants of presumably one of the wives of Noah's sons on the ark, why then did God make it very clear that He wanted them to destroy these tribes completely?
Well, in my opinion, I don't think that there's a genetic connection to the people before the flood. And again, that's where we obviously disagree. But what I see in the Hebrew grammar there, that there's no conflict, that the sons of God, there were giants on the earth in the days before and afterward.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hebrew word there is asher, so it can be which, it can be when, that, because, lesser, that's a lesser usage, it's true. But nevertheless.
Do I have to get my Strongs out?
Strongs isn't everything. It's not that strong.
This is great.
It's good for ratings, huh?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Old habits die hard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I just don't see it, because if you have, that means that we all have Nephilim strain in us, right? Because we're all, and of course, where does this lead? This means that basically Africans have Nephilim strain in them more than anybody else. And I think there's a real problem with that.
No, I reject that notion altogether. That notion comes from the idea that all Africans come from Ham.
Well,
based on where he is said to have settled. But you have to remember, he settled that region. Actually, Ham was one of the sons that didn't respect the boundaries at all, because Ham took off into Europe. Ham was over in Shem's territory. Ham was all over the place. But prior to that, all three sons and their families of Genesis chapter 10 were mingled together in the plains of Shinar for probably 50 to 100 years, long enough to build a city and a tower, to do everything that they did prior to the languages being confused. And so Noah and his wife, whatever race, color they were, would have produced three offspring of the exact same color race. I reject the notion altogether that Noah and his wife produced a European and an Asian and an African. I don't see that. That the three sons of Noah would have been the same race as Noah and his wife. And they all mingled together, even if you subscribe to the idea that there are three different races, they all mingled together for hundreds of years, or at least a few dozen or decades, in the plains of Shinar. So they were thoroughly mingled together. Skin color is determined by the production of melanin, which is a protective mechanism to protect the body against the harmful radiation of the sun. So, in the pre-flood world, if you subscribe to the idea that there was a canopy of water surrounding the earth, there would have been no harmful radiation of the sun, and everybody probably would have had a pinkish hue, which is why Adam's name essentially means red. So, I mean, that's my take on the races.
Well, let's move off this topic before we come to fisticuffs. We've had some questions from the audience during the break, and I want to get to those in a minute. But one that I still kind of grapple with: if the sons of God who sinned by keeping not their first estate, and Jude makes it very clear, just as Sodom and Gomorrah chased after strange flesh, or the angels sinned in the same manner and were then condemned to Tartarus until the final judgment. Why would, and I'll pose this to you, Doug, why would then another generation of fallen angels come back, having seen what happened to their brothers, and do the same thing again?
Because they have nothing to lose. They have everything to gain. Satan knows ultimately that his destiny will be destruction. So if he knows that the clock is ticking and he has to make a move, then he has nothing to lose. And it probably goes something like this. Listen, guys, if we win, then we win. If we lose, well, then, we didn't lose anything anyway. But here's what I'm promising to do you. I'm going to get you guys out of jail sooner than later, okay? And when do we see him getting them out of jail? Well, in Revelation chapter 9, a star falls from heaven, has the key to the bottomless pit, to the Tartarus. He opens it, and guess who comes out? Some really scary dudes. Mm-hmm. So, even if we take the Enoch into account, that there were initially 200 that did that. But who do we see coming out of the pit? 200 million. I mean, there are all kinds of, a huge number of these beings, presumably demons, or fallen angels, if you will, that were down there in the pit. So I'm not saying that they all did that at that time, but it's a calculated risk that you know that you're in big trouble anyway. So why not do this? Because this is what is needed to bring about Satan's ultimate
So they're
plan.
doubling down, in other words.
They're doubling down, yeah.
Okay. That presupposes that Tartarus is not as scary as all the texts say that it is. Semjaza in Enoch chapter 6 starts off this whole thing by saying, Semjaza, who was their leader, said to them, I fear you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of this great sin. So before they even did what they did, they fully acknowledged that what they were doing was a great sin, which would come with a great consequence. Sure enough, as you continue to read Enoch, there was a great consequence, and all through the text, when the judgment is being pronounced, you see them absolutely in terror. Complete terror of the judgment. When you get to Enoch chapter 68, Michael is looking at this whole scene, and he says, On that day Michael answered Raphael and said, The power of the Spirit grips me and makes me tremble because of the severity of the judgment of the secrets and the judgment of the angels. Who can endure this severe judgment that has been executed and before which they melt away? And he goes on to say, Michael answered again and said to Raphael, Who would not have a softened heart concerning this, and whose mind would not be troubled by this judgment against them because of those who have led them out? And it came to pass, when they stood before the Lord of Spirits, Michael said to Raphael, I will not defend them under the eye of the Lord, for the Lord of Spirits has been angry with them, because they act as if they were the Lord. Therefore all that is hidden shall come on them forever and ever, and no other angel or man will have his portion in this judgment, but they alone have received their judgment forever and ever. So here we see both bad and good angels absolutely terrified of this particular judgment, and Michael prophesies it's never going to happen again. And the context, as you read through up to the 68, is because of the severity of the judgment. So when we think about them not having anything to lose, let's just use some common sense. They know, because the demon said, if you come to torment us before the time, that there is in fact a time in the future when they know that their destination is the lake of fire. At this time, that's about 6,000 years in the future, maybe 5,000. Okay, that's way in the distance. So let's just put this out as a hypothetical to think about with common sense. If you knew that you were going to have a terrible judgment imposed on you next week, would you want to take a chance of going through a really bad judgment today in addition to the really bad one that's coming next week? Or would you want to take the most advantage of the time that you have left to live and do whatever you want to do until your time runs out? I believe there's only one other biblical incursion in the Bible, and that's when Lucifer is cast out of heaven. And the book of Isaiah talks about how thou art fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, right? And it talks about in that same chapter that God's going to destroy his children. So we see Lucifer being cast out of heaven by Michael, the archangel, in Revelation chapter 12, when he goes to make war with the dragon and kicks him out of heaven. Isaiah picks up the story. Apparently he has some children, and God destroys them. And then what do we see in the end of Revelation? Before he goes to the lake of fire, he is bound in chains and put in prison. Well, the context is Tartarus. So here we see the one and only other text where God would not be just if he did not impose the same exact judgment on any angel who participated in that great sin. And the only other one we have confirmation of is Lucifer himself having sex with angels, and he too is bound in chains and put in prison, which is Tartarus. And we know that that's not the lake of fire because it says death and Hades, which includes Tartarus, is later cast into the lake of fire. So it's a separate place.
Incidentally, in Isaiah 24:21, it says that the Lord is going to execute judgment against the host of heaven, and then he is going to gather them together as prisoners into a pit, and they will, after many days they will be judged. So the fallen angels that commit the same sin as Satan are going to be thrown into the pit at that time, and they'll be there for 1,000 years. So I don't think anyone's disagreeing that it's not a very nice place. You don't want to go there. There's no question. I guess, maybe we should just leave it at that. I think you make a very eloquent case.
Thank you.
I'm just not yet convinced.
Well, and I have to say that the discourse that you're seeing right here on the stage is, in my view, an example of how it should be conducted when we find ourselves not in complete agreement over issues that aren't essential core doctrinal issues of the faith. And sadly, and I think you guys would agree, that some of these issues that we're discussing right now have, in some corners of the internet, become nasty over issues that, again, are not really central to sin, sin and salvation. I mean, as Paul said, what we should be about is Christ and Him crucified. And at the end of the day, all of this has to point back to the cross, or we're just engaging in mind, exercise.
Absolutely.
With no real purpose.
Yeah, and we're just searching for the truth, right? Yeah. I mean, I think Rob's an incredible researcher, and I respect the research he's done. He's not an easy guy to debate. So, and I'm listening. I think he has some very good points, but I guess I need more time to think about what he's saying, or something has to happen. But, but we're seeking the truth. That's what we're looking for, right? We're seeking the truth. And that's all I'm interested in, is the truth.
My DNA is that of a kid who loves an argument, like the guy in the Monty Python sketch. I was high school debate team captain a couple of years, qualified for Illinois state finals a couple of times. Got my hind end kicked at the finals, but made it there. So whenever I hear something, I start thinking, okay, how do I know this is true? How do I know this is real? And that kind of is the background of my testimony, which is for another time. Now, in the supporting evidence that you give for your case, Rob, you're relying on books that are referenced in the Bible, and portions of which are confirmed in the Bible. We mentioned 2 Peter and Jude. They talk about the sin of the angels and how God passed judgment on them, cast them down in Tartarus. Some of the other things that you mentioned, like the fear of the angels over judgment, is not in the Bible. How do we know that we can take sources like Jasher and Enoch, at least the portions of Enoch not confirmed by 2 Peter and Jude, as authoritative sources?
That's a great question. I'm looking for evidence as a researcher, and so all I can do is point to the available evidence that I see. It's a whole nother case to try to establish the validity of these books, and I think all of us agree these are not canon, although the Ethiopians still considered Enoch to be canon. It's kind of popped in and out of various Bibles, I guess. But ultimately, when I'm researching, I'm looking for confirming witnesses. And if I'm going to go outside of the Bible, I choose to only go, when I'm looking for biblical evidence, I'm only going to go to the texts that are endorsed by the Bible itself. That's why I call them the synchronized, biblically endorsed extra-biblical texts, because under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, God told the writers of canon, hey, go ahead and reference this book. Go ahead and quote this book. Go ahead and mention that book by name. So, those are the books I'm going to stick to if I'm going to continue to look for confirmation. And I see, what do these guys have to gain or lose? They're not writing these things for the benefit of Rob's debate team. They're not. This is ancient Hebrew texts that go back thousands of years. So what do they have to gain by telling us that after the first generation Nephilim are killed, they started mixing animals and humans together? I mean, no matter how you look at it, these are ancient texts that go back they go back thousands of years. And so just the fact that these guys were writing it helps you to get into the mind, in my opinion, of both the writers of canon as well as the audience of the people who wrote canon. They were all keenly aware of the stories of Enoch. Doug mentioned in a prior segment that, this is like a bestseller in the first century. So, I figure if it's good enough for the Holy Spirit to inspire the writers of the Bible to quote it, reference it, call it by name, it's good enough for me to at least look at it and maybe even use it for a debate.
One of the questions that came from the audience during the break, angels are interdimensional, spiritual beings. We know that the Bible tells us that the species God created reproduce after their own kind. How then is it possible for angels and humans to produce offspring?
Well, I don't know exactly how they do it, but they do. I guess that's kind of the bottom line. We know that angels are able. In fact, L.A. Marzulli, I think, did it very eloquently. That angel that came to get Peter out of prison was able to manipulate the metal and the wood and all this different stuff. So part of the problem is we've set ourselves up with this idea that if something is spiritual, that it's sort of fuzzy and windy and all this kind of stuff. But if you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul says, "Brethren, I don't want you to be ignorant that all of your brethren were under the cloud, and they were baptized into Moses, and they all ate the same spiritual bread." Well, they ate manna in the wilderness, right? I mean, and how was that spiritual bread? Well, it was spiritual not because it wasn't really there. It was spiritual because it came from the other dimension. It came from the heavenly realm, if you will. And that's what made it spiritual. And the same thing about the water. He says they all drank the same spiritual drink. Well, again, the water didn't come from planet Earth. So, if you go on a tour to Israel and they say, well, we think this is where, they had the water because Moses hit something and there was this underground fountain. No. This water came from the other domain. That's what made it spiritual. So, things that are spiritual are very tangible, but they're not made of carbon. That's probably the easiest way to understand it, is they're not made of carbon. So, can angels pass on their seed? And I talked about this in the last, in my thing I talked about this evening, on the genetics of the incarnation, that when we talk about seed, we're talking about information. When we talk about DNA, we're talking about information. Now, DNA is just a perfectly integrated hardware and software component, where you have the hardware, it's perfectly intertwined with the software. So when we look at the phosphates or the phosphorus, the double helix, plus we have the nucleic acids, but within that we have this code that we cannot see, and information is a non-material entity. So when it comes to angels, they are able to cross beyond the veil in ways that we don't understand. And they can materialize, if we want to call it that, in our world. And again, in ways that we don't understand. And yet we're told that they're able to pass on their information. My goodness, even it says that God has seed. In 1 John 3:9, it says that no one having been born again continues to sin, for the seed of God dwells in him. And we even see in Isaiah 53:10, it says that it pleased the Lord to bruise him and make his soul an offering for sin, and he shall see his seed and prolong his days. So that's talking about Jesus the Messiah, that he would have seed. How does Jesus have seed? Well, again, it's that information that we're talking about. So it's not simply, we think of human reproduction, we think of sexual intercourse. That may be entailed there, but it may not. It may not be that. It's simply the passing on of information that really is at the heart of the matter.
I love the way he articulated that. I had him on my radio show, I don't remember when it was now, several months ago. When he said that DNA is information, everything just fell into place for me. I didn't have to think in terms of chemicals and, all of that, genes and all that. It's information. I'm like, oh, wow. So I've long been trying to wrap my mind around the fact that I believe that there's a spiritual component to DNA. There has to be. I mean, if you just take sperm and egg, you put it together, and this explosion of life takes place, and a spirit enters that embryo and creates life. There's something there. And if you think about God's Holy Spirit overshadowing Mary, God's Holy Spirit, and we're thinking angels in terms of spirits, well, you got the Spirit right here, impregnated Mary. So if we can accept that the Holy Spirit impregnated Mary, why is it such a stretch to think that angel spirits could not do the same thing? That there definitely appears to be that they have seed. They certainly do. And my personal theory on it is that, and others have said this as well, that's where I heard it from others, but God put Adam and Eve in the garden as perfect environment, and they could have everything, but except for that tree right there. There was a choice given to them. And so I wonder if the angels did not have something like that put into them as well. I don't see any evidence in the scriptures of female angels. So they appear to be all male angels, but they also appear to have the ability to come and act like people. They can eat with people, walk with people. You never know. You might be entertaining
angels underwear.
An angel underwear. So if they have the plumbing, so to speak, to process food, it's not such a stretch to think they might have the plumbing for reproduction as well. And maybe God allowed them to have that as a choice. In other words, yeah, you got the plumbing, but you're not allowed to touch the women. This is your choice. This is your tree, if you will, temptation. That apparently 200 of them, at least, it may be more, but 200 that we know of in the book of Enoch fell. They partook of their version of the forbidden fruit, so to speak. That would be my take on it.
In the interest of keeping us to a reasonable time length, both for viewers, listeners, and for you brave souls here in the audience who have stayed up with us as we're approaching midnight here local time, we'll maybe go another 5 or 10 minutes here. What then is the end game? How do we tie this whole paradigm, this worldview, the fallen angels, their seed, the Nephilim, to what is coming? I mean, what are they doing with these hybrids? Are they doing anything with the hybrids? Are they trying to convince us through the genetic experimentation that we read about in laboratories around the world? We've read in the United Kingdom they've already created animal-human hybrids in the laboratory. What is the purpose of all of this? Why should this matter?
Well, I think the end game, I don't know if I could say it in 5 minutes. I was going to talk about it tomorrow. The mark of the beast is kind of the end game. And if we go back to Genesis 3:15, it talks about the seed of the woman and the seed of Satan. And the seed of Satan is the Antichrist, which means that just as the seed of the woman, as we've just kind of been talking about this, of course that is the Lord Jesus. It's the combination of two different seeds. So too, the counterfeit of that, the Antichrist, will be the combination of two different seeds. Then what I see happening is that he's going to make his seed available for humanity to essentially download. And the mark of the beast, I think, is going to be much more than just a computer chip. It's actually going to be a genetic alteration of the person themselves. And it's very fascinating if we think about the 144,000, how they were sealed. Actually, let's start the other side. If somebody takes the mark of the beast, they're done. It's over. There's no going back. But we can say the same thing. If somebody is then sealed with the Lord, there's no going back. They are there. In fact, with those 144,000, it looks like they actually have their new bodies. They are the first fruits of the resurrection. And so what I see Satan trying to do is he is trying to imitate the salvation that the Lord wants to give us. But this is sort of his version of it. And, I think if the Lord were not to intervene, then they might get what they wanted, which is immortality of sorts. Not true immortality, but, longevity of life, let's call it. Some type of superhuman power and strength and mind.
Well, to bring this into pop culture,
yes.
Like the recent television series V, where suddenly they were promising all these miracle cures to humans.
Exactly.
Something like that, where, hey, if you take this genetic change, we can upgrade you, make you human 2.0.
Exactly. And so, of course, much of the world is going to fall for this. And it's also, one way to get people damned on that one hand, but it's also probably part of a way to help build that army so that when the Lord comes back, that's the end game, right? Is they know the Lord's coming back. Satan's smart enough to know the Lord's coming back. So he needs to get his act together and get his army big enough to attempt to repel the coming king. So I think that's the end game.
There's really nothing more that I would add to that. You nailed it. That's exactly what I would say. He's building an army. But what's interesting about the creation of Nephilim, though, in the book of Enoch, it says that when a Nephilim dies, the offspring of an angel mating with a human, when the Nephilim dies, their disembodied spirits go out as evil spirits and become demons. So you got a double whammy there, because if you create a Nephilim, you've got this monstrosity. If we go the giant route, you've got these huge giants that are cannibalistic and do all kinds of terrible bad things. And then when you kill him, well, a demon just popped out of him, and now that's going to torment you. So he can't increase his numbers in terms of he's outnumbered as an angel 2 to 1. So he's only got 1/3 of the angels with him. But what if he could just keep producing demons? Just create a Nephilim factory and pump out demons. You either got giants or you kill them and you got demons. So I do believe
like the Uruk-hai in the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings. Tolkien, he knew it. I think he understood this.
And interesting that they were called Uruk, as in Iraq, as in the seat of Nimrod's kingdom back in Genesis chapter 10. Uruk-hai. If the spirits of the deceased Nephilim are demons, then in a sense the Nephilim have never left.
Yeah, Dr. Judd Burton, I'm going to quote something from his book, Interview with the Giant. He said, despite the loss of their physical bodies from dying in the flood, there is reason to believe that the giants' spirits continue to exist. In this state, they were and are demonic entities. Like other sentient creatures, they have an eternal spirit at their essence. Therefore, the Nephilim and related tribes of giants never really ceased to exist. Only their physicality was lost. And that is the reason why I believe the creation of animal-human hybrids took place both before the flood and in our day, because God created everything to have a specific kind. He's very, very detailed about this in Genesis. Everything must reproduce after its own kind. Paul later says that there's one flesh for birds and one for animals and one for people, one body for angels, one for humans. It seems to be God said, everybody's supposed to be the way I created it and reproduce after its own kind. So when you blend species together, you're creating something God never intended to exist. So if everything that God created, normal, good, perfect, the way He wanted it, He has a prescribed spirit for each one. An animating force for a dog, for a cat, for a human, There's one that's fit for that creature. If you create something that God didn't create, what spirit could go into it? God doesn't have one prescribed for it. So according to Dr. Judd Burton's take here, and I agree with this, you've just created a host body that's perfect for a disembodied spirit to inhabit, thus bringing back the return of the Nephilim in a new body.
That sounds bad.
Not good.
Let's leave this on an up note. What's the good news? What is the takeaway? What do we as Christians hope for, look forward to, in spite of these dark days to come?
Well, there's one coming on a white horse, and he is going to slay the wicked with the sword of his mouth. And I'm hoping to be on one of those horses that's following him. So, we need to live lives that are pleasing to him. We want to be righteous. We want to be urgent with the message to tell people that, there's a lot of bad news, but there's some good news too, some very good news, and that we can have a new body, we're going to have a glorious destiny with the Lord, and we want to be faithful until that very last day that He actually does take us.
There's nothing to add to that. We win in the end.
The author of Corrupting the Image, Douglas Hamp. Author of Babylon Rising 2012, Rob Skiba. A hand for L.A. Marzulli, the author of the Alien Interviews and many other things. And a special hand for the cameraman who stayed up late tonight, Sam Miller, Mark Warren. Thank you for your patience in staying with us tonight. We certainly appreciate it. I know we've only scratched the surface of the topic, but that's why there's so much of the Bible to dig into. Remember, until next time, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is A View from the Bunker.
And I'll be talking about this subject at length tomorrow morning at 9:30.